Freudian revolution. Freud's basic discovery is the one of infantile sexuality. You know that already children are sexualized. Now you will say, oh, what's the big deal? It is, even today, a big deal, more than ever. Why? Did you notice how today in our society, which propagates itself as permissive and so on, like we no longer have sexual taboos, repressions, and so on, Freud's fundamental insight into the child's sexuality is strangely ignored. This is why I claim today pedophilia, annoying children, sexually molesting children, is elevated almost into the ultimate highest crime. It's a very strange phenomenon. Did you not notice how, again, with all this permissivity, children were exempted from it? And this is a new phenomenon. I remember when I was not doing it, but I remember when I was young, very young, in the 60s, 70s, sexual revolution. This was an open topic, children's sexuality. Some British radical Marxist feminists, like Sheila Rowbottom, I think, even claimed that bourgeois oppression will only be overthrown when sex will be considered normal between children and parents, when young children will be allowed sexuality, and so on. But today, again, I'm quoting Gerard Weitzman, a Lacanian who wrote this, quote, "The sole remaining prohibition, the one sacred value in our society that seems to remain, is to do with children. It is forbidden to touch a hair on their little blonde heads, as if children had rediscovered that angelic purity on which Freud managed to cast some doubt. And it is undoubtedly the diabolical figure of Freud that we condemn today, seeing him as the one who, by uncovering the relationship of childhood to sexuality, quite simply depraved our virginal childhoods. In an age when sexuality is exhibited on every street corner, the image of the innocent child has returned with a vengeance." I think, again, if you want to really perceive what is wrong with our permissivity, this is the crucial insight, that permissivity, yes, but everything can be sexualized except children. Yeah. You know where you can see this? Now I will propose you a crazy reading of some popular films. I even claim that this is why, you know, films like Home Alone were so popular. It's absolutely crucial that the child who wins there is magically asexual. I must say I almost enjoyed those films. Okay, the first two are better than Home Alone 3 and 4. Why? Because I think that if you drop the sentimentality, what I like is the last 20 minutes when you have the final big confrontation between the child and the two evil robbers or whatever. What I like is how you enter there a different ontological universe. The universe of undead monsters. It's like the universe of cartoons. People cannot die there. Whatever, you know, for example, I think it's Home Alone 2, where the guy's head, his hair burns. And then he runs to the toilet and puts his burning head into the toilet. But of course, the child knew this, so he put alcohol into the toilet so that the bad guy's head explodes. But it's like in a cartoon, you know. His head is burned, you know, or whatever happens, you never die. Destruction can go endlessly. It's the same universe as in the cartoons. I always like them, you know, Tom and Jerry, where the cat or the mouse, you know, he can be cut, sliced, run over by a car, whatever. It always magically recomposes itself and goes on living. It's this undead, frightening innocence of a child which has to be desexualized. But let me go on now. What then is so scandalous about infantile sexuality? it is not only the fact that what is so shocking in this Freud's discovery about infantile sexuality. It's not simply that also children, even children presumed innocent, are already sexualized. I think the scandal resides in two characteristics, which are of course connected, two sides of the same coin. First, infantile sexuality consists or is a strange entity which is neither biologically grounded nor part of cultural norms. This is what is so, listen carefully now, because this is not as self-evident as it may appear. When Freud talks about infantile sexuality, are you aware that he is describing something very strange? It has no biological foundation. Child sexuality is biologically meaningless. I mean, biologically, we have sexuality to copulate, to produce children, blah, blah. So but it's also obviously not part of our cultural norms, because precisely our cultural norms exclude, prohibit child sexuality. However, the further paradox is that this weird infantile sexuality does not simply disappear later when we become mature, grown-up people with normal sexuality. A Slovene colleague of mine, Alenka Zupancic, who wrote a wonderful text on infantile sexuality, quote, "When it comes to sexuality, man is subject to the greatest of paradoxes. What is acquired through the drives precedes what is innate and instinctual, in such a way that at the time it emerges, instinctual sexuality, which is adaptive, finds the seat already taken as it were by infantile drives already present in the unconscious." So you see the point. Our instinctual, innate sexuality is normal sexuality done to produce children and so on and so on. But the paradox of human sexuality is that you don't get first primitive instinctual sexuality which is then perverted through culture or whatever. No, you begin with perversion. It is as if man is really a strange being, natural. It is as if you begin with unnatural perversion, all these infantile perversions, and then somehow the point is how to fit these natural perversions into some kind of normal instinctual order. Second point is that this strange excess infantile sexuality is based on the link between sexuality and knowledge, condition. Against the standard idea of sexuality as some kind of instinctual vital force, which is then repressed or sublimated through the work of culture, since it poses a threat to culture. This is how Freud is usually read, no? That we have some instinctual vital force which is crazy, non-civilized, and that the work of culture is slowly to cultivate. You know, like, I don't just rape my wife, I at least pretend to be civilized and write poems or whatever, I buy her presents. Precisely this infantile sexuality is not natural, but linked from the very beginning to the problem of knowledge. What sexualizes children is certain lack of knowledge. Like, what does it mean? It can even be the question, cognitive probing. Where do children come from? And so on and so on. Sexuality is from the very beginning infantile sexuality. It's a cognitive problem. This is why I claim that, just think about, and I found them sometimes wonderful, this children's myth about how children are born, precisely. Even if they are wrong, they generate a certain meaning, fantasies which are crucial precisely for sexuality, and which, again, remain with sexuality to the end. For example, one myth, I believed in it for a long time. When I was 7, 8, 9 years old, I knew about sexual act, but it wasn't clear to me. So I thought that you had to make love hundreds of times to construct, like you have to produce a child, you have to copulate with your wife hundreds of times. I remember a crazy, this was told to me when I was young as a secret, about how children are made, how a beautiful combination of, it's a very loving, touching scenario of copulation, sexual act, and the fact that storks, in your culture also, in our culture, storks are the stupid birds who are supposed to bring children, no? And I heard a wonderful mythological combination of the two. But storks want to be sure that the couple really loves each other. So the idea is that when you make love to a woman, storks are observing you. And if the couple is making love in a nice way, then stork said, okay, you deserve a reward, so we will bring you a child, and so on. So now comes the crucial point. What does not happen with us humans? Now you will say, a normal situation would have been, first you have all these crazy dreams, crazy fantasies, What is specific for human sexuality, and this is what makes it human, is that no, you never have simple, direct sex. That you can say now we no longer need fantasies and so on. The whole Freudian theory of fantasies, for example, to give you an example of what I want to say, David Lynch's Blue Velvet. There is that famous scene when Kyle MacLachlan, the hero of the film, observes through a crack in the closet where he is hidden the brutal sexual interplay between Dennis Hopper and Isabella Rossellini. And you know how sexual that something strange happens in that sexual interplay, that when engaged in sexual activity, Dennis Hopper puts on a breathing mask, and as if breathing oxygen heavily, and the French cinema theoretician Michel Chion proposed a wonderful reading of this scene, that it should be read as a visualization of what a child is imagining when not even observing but hearing parents. Imagine you don't yet know what is sex. And as every normal child, you go to the door of the dormitory where your parents are making love, and what do you hear? You hear these pre-orgasmic men doing the hard work, heavy breathing. And this would be a typical child fantasy, that heavy breathing, oh my God, is my father having a mask on and, do this oxygen breathing and so on and so on. So, but, the idea of fantasy is precisely that we humans never get over that phase. We never return to some normal animal level where you say, oh, now let's just make love, let's forget about all the fantasies. No, this is what Lacan means when he talks about il n'y a pas de rapport sexuel. There is no sexual relationship. That for us, for sex to function, these fantasies which prolong infantile sexuality, you know, all this crazy idea, how you do it through magic. This has to remain and has to sustain sex. Deleuzian idea, pseudo-Deleuzian, basically, it's more complex, that we have infantile sexuality, all this plural multitude of polymorphous perversions, and then in our patriarchal societies, society intervenes with the brutally imposing the Oedipal genital norm. And then sexual liberation would have been, let's break out of this genital heterosexual normativity, let's reassert all polymorphous perversions, and so on and so on. From a proper Freudian perspective, it's not as simple as that, because these polymorphous perversions are here precisely to fill in the gap of normal sexual relationship. You don't know what it is, you fill it in, you fill the void in with polymorphous perversions. The point would have been this one, that what, for us humans, what changes, what transforms simple animal copulation into human sex proper is precisely the intervention of fantasies which have to sustain our sexuality. The idea being that we humans are never alone in sex. It's never me, my partner, we are just doing it. You have to have certain fantasies which sustain your sexuality. That's what Freud meant. It's not the vulgar pansexualism in the sense of we always think about that, whatever we are doing, that the meaning of everything is sexual, you know, like, I don't know, I'm beating someone, I'm in a hysterical way, like, you know, that everything I do has to mean something sexually. No. Freud's message is a much more refined one. It's not that whatever we are doing, the metaphoric meaning of that is sexual. The true problem is not that whatever I'm doing, I'm secretly thinking about sex. The true problem is, but what I'm thinking about when I am doing sex. And it cannot be sex itself. You know, you need some fantasy, you imagine a gaze or whatever. I remember long years ago, when I was young, in a German journal, I think it was Stern or Spiegel, they published in their summer issue, a series of caricatures asking men, what will you be doing this summer? And one man says, I would like to visit some wild jungle. The other man says, I would like to visit some Greek monument. A third man says, I would like just to be in a restaurant and eat nicely a lot. The fourth man said, I would like just to read books and so on, listen to music. But then, you know, while each of them gives this kind of civilized version, you have this like balloon, like in a comics, and showing what they really think about. It's always the same naked woman, you know, like they pretend to want to read, to travel, but really they think about that. Lacan developed this further in a wonderful way apropos Christianity. He claims that although officially the position of the Church, especially Catholic Church, is against all these multiple perversions and only for normative heterosexuality. Here I quote again Alenka Zupancic, the long quote from her. So there is something profoundly disruptive at stake in copulation. For the kind of social bond it proposes, Christianity doesn't need the later, copulation, which functions as the superfluous element, something on top of what would be ideally needed and hence as disturbing. Indeed, natural copulation is utterly banned from Christian imaginary, whereas this imaginary widely uses images of canonized saints eating the excrements of another person and so on. If look from this perspective, Christianity is indeed all about jouissance, enjoyment of the body, about the body of God as constituting another person's enjoyment. Partial drives and the satisfaction they provide. And in this sense, we would be justified in claiming that in its libidinal aspect, the Christian religion massively relies on what belongs to the register of infantile sexuality, satisfaction and bonding by way of partial objects with the exclusion of sexual coupling. The pure enjoyment for the sake of enjoyment, is not exactly what is banned here. What is banned of repressed is its link with sexuality, particularly in the form of copulation. Incidentally, if you know Michel Foucault, his idea of shifting from sexuality to pleasures, these multiple perverse pleasures, I think he is wrong in his target here. Christianity already does this. The whole idea of religious rituals or all these sadomasochist practices of mystical training or whatever is precisely mobilizing all polymorphous sexual polymorphous practices at the expense of copulation. So, okay, what I want to say, okay, I will go very fast here, are two crucial points, further points. Why then is Christianity opposed to sexuality? Why is sexuality the ultimate sin, temptation, and so on? Now, this is a crucial point. It's not because sexuality is just flesh and so on, but because it's another competitive metaphysics. Lacan makes this point nicely. How sexuality is the first elementary form of metaphysics in the sense of you have a passion which is literally metaphysical, which, when you are caught into this passion, makes you act in an unnatural way. Like what happens when you are passionately in love? You are ready to neglect all your ordinary consideration. It's really like a metaphysical passion. This is why sexuality is dangerous. The point of Lacan here oscillates between two versions. One version is that animals know how to copulate in a natural way. It's an instinct, while we humans, for us there is no sexual relationship and we need sexual meets, whatever. This is part of a certain anthropology which is a very traditional European philosophical anthropology which defines, you find this already in Kierkegaard and others, man as a sick, perverted animal. The idea is animals live harmonious lives, even if it's a catastrophe, but animals are controlled by their instincts. They tell them when to copulate, how, whatever, while we humans are without roots. We have to learn everything. So as if nature is a harmonious closed circle, while humanity is a catastrophe. We lose our roots. That's why we need the symbolic universe. That's why we need to learn even natural things like how to make children and so on and so on. But the problem is that in his so man would have been in this sense an exception of nature. Nature, again, is natural precisely. Here we have to ask the philosophical question, what do we mean here by natural? We mean controlled by instincts where everyone knows his, her, their place. And that's why the same guy, Gerard Weitzman, wrote a wonderful text about these channels like National Geographic and so on. Why do we find such a satisfaction in this? watching these channels, reports on a certain animal community, how rats live, how ants live, how bears live, whichever animal, because it's a society which functions, in contrast to our human confused society. Things function, they know how to do, when to do it, and so on. This idea of harmonious nature, and then man as the unnatural element which disturbs nature, which is already there in nature itself. It's not that we humans are crazy while, you know, prone to perversions, we need a master to control us, while animals are normal, harmonious. No, there must be madness, confusion, as it were, already in nature itself.